Hi guys, Goffy here, and I know it's been a little while since I posted a video, but I've been doing a couple of things behind the scenes that will be revealed very soon. I'm also on a trip next week where I'm going to be recording I think 3 different videos, so there's plenty of content coming. But in the meantime, in today's video, we're going to be doing another tips and tricks video with the Fuji X100V. I did a video on this previously and it was very well received. If you haven't checked out that video, I suggest that you do. It's got a lot of practical tips inside of it, and today we're going to be building on those tips and I'm going to be going through some more. Now the reason I'm going through some more, and kind of the reason why I've staggered the video, is my usage of this camera is evolving quite a lot. I feel like over the 6 or so months that I've owned it now, I'm learning different things and the way that I'm using the camera is changing. So every time that happens, I think what I'm going to do is then update you guys on the settings and things that I'm using to try and get the most out of this camera. First up, and one that I'm continuing to mess around with a little bit, is the My menu. The My menu is a page in the settings where you can tailor it to just have the settings on it that you frequently use. It's something that I'm still messing around with and I'm not dead certain on what things I want on that menu, but this is how you set it up. By default, if you head to the menu, you'll see down at the bottom left there's a little grayed out box that says the My menu. Now to actually set what's in this menu, you need to head to Setup, User Settings, My Menu Settings, and then Add Items. From here you can select each of the options that you want to display in this menu. You can then also head back a page and rank them so you can change the order in which they display. Now from the live view, when you press the menu button, it will hop to this My menu and show you this menu before anything else. And this can be really handy if you find yourself forever rummaging around the menus looking for certain settings. You can set them up so they just display here. If you decide though that you actually don't really like this and you want to turn it off again, what you just need to do is head back to the same place. So head back to Setup, User Settings, My Menu Settings, and then just remove each of the options that you picked, and then when you go back to the menu screen, you'll see that you just default back to the top again and the My menu is grayed out down at the bottom. Next up is the autofocus range limiter. Now what this setting does is it tells your camera what area you want the camera to focus. Now some of the reasons why you might want to use this is things like street photography. In street photography, generally you know you're not going to focus on anything closer than say 2 meters to you. Therefore you can tell the camera ignore the 10 centimeter close focusing to the 2 meters and only focus beyond that. It gives the camera a much smaller area to work in and it can help it achieve focus quicker. Another reason you might want to do this is if you're trying to frame something with a foreground element that you want to keep out of focus, you can tell the camera to ignore it and only shoot past it. Now to set this, if you head to the autofocus and manual focus page, then head to the third page, there is a AF range limiter setting. In here you'll see there is 2 defaults already set up. There's one that's 2 meters to infinity and 5 meters to infinity. This will mean that the camera will ignore closer than 2 meters and closer than 5 meters respectively. There is also an option in here to set your own. I personally use the 2 meter one. I find that covers pretty much everything that I'd ever want to do. Just remember though, if you find yourself struggling to focus on close things, having put this setting on, that you need to turn it back off again. It's quite easy to forget that you've got this on and wonder why your camera is struggling to focus on things that are up close. Next up, another feature that I find really helpful is the electronic level. What I really like about how Fuji does this is it's something very simple. It's just a line that goes across the screen and it lets you know whether or not your camera's level. Some other manufacturers do this, but they just go to town on what the interface looks like and it ends up using up an awful lot of screen space, but Fuji's implementation of this is nice and simple. To turn this on, you have to dig pretty deep and you have to go to Setup, Screen Setup, Display Custom Settings, which you'll find on page 3, EVF/LCD, and then enable the electronic level. Then if you head back to live view, you'll see a green line across the screen when it's level and a white line when it's not. I find this really helpful, helping me try and compose, especially if I'm at places like the beach where I can see the horizon. It helps me get them nice and straight. Also another one when it comes to live view and the viewfinder is the grid. The Fuji X100V by default does not have a grid turned on, and I love having a little 3x3 grid because it helps me do things like the rule of thirds. And there's actually 2 places you need to go for this. There's one place where you actually go and enable the grid, and there's another place where you can go and change what grid's displaying. So first up, to enable the grid, if you head to Setup, Screen Setup, then Display Custom Settings page 3, EVF/LCD, and then Framing Guideline. This will by default I think show the 3x3 grid, but if you want to change the grid that's displaying, you can head back into the settings and go to Setup, Screen Setup, and then framing guideline on page 2. And you can see in here it gives you the options for a 9 grid, a 24 grid, and a HD view as well. Like I said, my personal favourite is the 9 grid, as that really helps you when it comes to rule of thirds. Another one that I've started to do recently, and I'm telling you this has increased my battery life by what feels like 2 times, is changing how quickly the camera auto powers off. I think by default it might be set on 2 minutes, and I didn't realise how much battery that was actually using up. I've actually changed this setting so that my camera now turns off after 30 seconds of not being used, and the battery difference that I've found is genuinely incredible. I've also found because the Fuji X100V boots up very quickly, I'm not missing shots by the camera turning itself off. To change this setting, if you head to Setup, Power Management, then Auto Power Off, you'll see in here there's various different times that you can pick, and like I said, I've set mine to 30 seconds, I think the default might be 2 minutes. Next up is a part of the camera that I found myself barely ever using, and that's the quick menu. When you press the Q button on the camera, by default it opens up a 16 button grid. It's 4x4 and it's, I find, just a little bit too cluttered for me to ever bother using. By the time I've actually found the symbol that I'm looking for on that grid, I could have probably just headed to the menu and found it anyway. But what you can do is change the amount of icons showing in that grid. So what I've done is I've actually turned it from 16 down to 8, meaning the grid's an awful lot easier to look at, the symbols are a bit bigger, and it's only got the things that I care about on it. To edit the number of slots and what's showing, if you head to Setup, Button Dial Settings, then Edit/Save Quick Menu, you'll then see the number of slots that you'd like to use. I've said that I'm going for 8 now rather than 16. There is also an option for 4, which simplifies things even further. And once you've selected how many, the next screen lets you pick what you want displaying in each of those slots. Then from back in the live view, when you press the Q button, you'll just see that much more simplified menu, and you won't have to find yourself looking through all 16 icons to find what you actually want to use. Next up then is the depth of field scale. Now this is one that is very subjective, and it's going to depend on the type of photography that you do and how you go around using manual focus when you do use manual focus. First up, I think we should take a look at the 2 settings that are homed inside this option. To find this option, if you head to Autofocus/Manual Focus, Depth of field scale. 2 options in here are pixel basis and film basis. By default, your camera will be set to pixel basis, and if we select that and have a look at the camera back in live view and in manual focus, you can see using the depth of field scale across the bottom how much of the image is in focus by looking at the little blue bar down at the bottom. You'll see here at f8 that not a lot of the image is in focus. Now if we head back to the settings and change this to the film basis mode and go back to live view, you'll now show that it's saying that an awful lot more of the image is in focus than before, but surely only one of these 2 can be right. Now this is where the subjective part comes in. Now in theory, wherever you're focusing in an image, that plane of focus is all that is genuinely in focus, and then as you move away from where you're focusing, things start to blur. And it'll get to a point where you will find something perceivably out of focus rather than in focus. And what this is doing is it's talking about at what point is it acceptable for things to be in or out of focus. Now the pixel setting is far more accurate, and if you plan on displaying this image at full size or doing 100% crops and really pixel peeping, then you'll definitely want to be using the pixel version, as this should have everything in focus in a far more precise manner. However, the film basis mode has a much bigger range of what's perceived to be in focus. Now the reason for this is there is a big difference between pixel peeping and what our eyes actually perceive when displaying an image normally or in a print. Now normally or in a print, there is a bigger tolerance in terms of what we deem with our eyes to be in focus than what is actually in focus with the image. If you've ever used a manual focus camera and looked at the lens, you'll see that it has like distance markings on it that give you an idea based on your f-stop how much of the image is in focus, and this will be done based on film basis. This is what we perceive with our eyes to be in focus when viewing an image normally. So therefore, in my personal usage, if I am manually focusing, I'll be doing something called zone focusing. So I'll generally be on an f-stop, something like f8, and I'll be focusing manually. To me, all I care about what is perceived to be in focus. I'm going to be displaying these images likely on social media or in small prints. I'm not going to be blowing these prints up massive. They're just going to be viewed in a pretty normal way. And I'd rather have that bigger depth of field scale across the bottom, letting me know what my eyes will perceive to be in focus, rather than what is actually in focus from a pixel peeping perspective. That's all of the tips from this video, and like I said earlier, if you haven't watched my previous video, go and check that out. It's got a lot more tips in it as well, and none of them overlap with today's. I'm really enjoying using this camera, and like I said earlier, my usage of this camera is changing over time. I'm finding new features that I like to use, binning off some of the old ones, and I'll keep updating you guys as we go in terms of like what settings that I'm currently using and which ones I'm finding that are really helping my photography. If you've enjoyed this video though guys, please do not forget to like and subscribe. It'd be great to have you along for the journey, and I've got an awful lot more Fuji and film content in the works, and it should be coming out very, very soon. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Cheers!